What's up, Mortal Kombat fans?
What's up, Mortal Kombat fans?
My name is Nathan.
And I'm Zach.
We're a podcast or a video cast if you're watching us right now on the YouTubes, TikToks, all the visual social media platforms, or listening to us through the audio platforms in the world. We are a podcast that mainly talks about
religious trauma.
Religious trauma. Why is that, Zachary?
Well, we grew up in the Christian evangelical church with a father as a pastor and have suffered quite a bit of religious trauma, but have healed.
We've been healing a lot.
Healed
through this
quite
podcast.
a bit through
We've
this
been doing
podcast.
this maybe a year and a half now.
Yeah.
It didn't originally start off as a podcast about this thing called religious trauma.
No.
I hate identifying as being someone that suffers from trauma. But it's part of being a human being, I guess. We're just trying to have conversations about it. And we are so excited.
Yes, we are.
To have with us today, not in studio, but through the internet waves, using Zoom. She goes by the name Kim Shambaugh, and she is the owner and founder of Never Settle Life. And she comes from Cleveland, Ohio. Mm-hmm. She reached out to us vulnerably on her own through our social networks, wanting to join us as a conversation to share her story. So please, round of applause, very warm welcome to Kim Shambaugh.
What's up, you guys? Hi, thanks for having me.
What up? How are you?
Doing great today.
Yep, it's Sunday. It's about noon our time. What time is it for you?
It's 3:19 Eastern Standard Time.
So you've had lunch. You're well hydrated.
Yeah. Ready to go. Yep, just staying inside. It's like 7 degrees out today.
Oh, really?
7?
Wow.
Oh, wait, you know what? Yeah, so if you're in Cleveland, Ohio, you guys are getting some bad freezes. Is that true, right? Like record-breaking freezes?
I don't know about record-breaking. There was a pretty gnarly windstorm last night, but it's so funny because there's been no snow and the sun's out. So we're like, we don't care. If the sun is shiny, it can be like -50. We're happy.
Yeah.
All right. That's great. And yeah, right. You're not wearing a jacket or anything, so it's warm. And you have central heat in your house.
Yeah.
I would assume so.
Yeah. So right now where you are, you seem cozy. We are I know we're in Northern California.
Yeah.
And California is perceived to be a very warm state, which it is. But I think it's been like 38, 40 degrees at night. It's about 59 right now.
Yeah.
We're in the garage.
It's definitely not 7 degrees.
And it's not 7 degrees, but we're like, let's have a conversation.
All my California friends are like, oh my God, it's below 50. I need my parka. I'm like, all right, I'll come visit you.
I came into this interview with a sweater because the last time we were out here, I was what Zach's doing today, short sleeve, and it was
shivering. Yeah.
But yes, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you.
On our podcast. I know that you reached out to us, which we have so much gratitude for. One of our hurdles that we have found in our journeys doing this show and starting this podcast is we're talking about something that is rather extremely vulnerable and, scary for most people to come out publicly about. And Zach and I experienced a lot of that. We still experience that every week we do this. Mm-hmm. But most importantly, when we first started talking about this, we were absolutely scared shitless of what would come or the repercussions, or we even had like fears of attacks from past churchgoers. But here we are a year and a half into this talking about our religious trauma. And here you are, which means you have a story. And we don't know anything about you. We don't know what denomination. You just reached out to us. And so here you are. Did you have any ideas of how you wanted to maybe introduce yourself in this story that you have for us?
I can just tell you a bit about myself and a bit about what I do. I'm sure you'll get the most out of my experience, honestly, just going through my story. Yeah, so I think that would be a fine place to start.
Mm.
Sure. And I think that what we've learned is this story that we have and the story that you have and the story that we're learning, we believe a lot of people share in this country and many, many countries around the world of the religious histories that we come from, is the stories begin when some of us when we're born, some of us not. And so my first question to you is, were you born in some sort of faith? Or were you born in the church from a religious family?
I sure was. So my parents went to what I would call my home church, the church that I grew up in, and honestly was that was the only church that I had ever been a member of. So I'm from the Bible Belt. I'm from Asheville, North Carolina, and was born into my home church. And so I'm 34 now, just to kind of give some context. And I was heavily steeped in the evangelical Southern Baptist Church up until about age 26. And then things took a turn. So I'm sure we'll get into all of that.
Wow. Evangelical Baptist Christian Church, correct?
Yeah.
So, I mean, we always say we were from the Evangelical Christian Church, but you added that extra flair.
The Southern Baptist part?
Southern Baptist.
Yeah.
Southern Baptist.
And you have a North Carolina accent, or accident. You have a North Carolina accident. No. Accent. My fiance's dad is from North Carolina, and she's from Tennessee. And I really love this part of the country. I know you're in Cleveland now, but I've done a lot of traveling to this idea of the Bible Belt. And I've actually been able to connect with more of like the commuting culture. So anyways, putting in perspective where you're from, were your parents ministers in the church? Did they work in the church?
Yeah. So the way the story goes, my parents were both Sunday school teachers. My dad eventually, around my middle school years, he became a deacon. My brother which is my only sibling, he is 7 years older than me. He's a deacon at their church, and his wife is heavily involved with it. Their kids, very involved with it. Yeah, so everybody and I've had my roles as well, which I'm sure we'll get into that. But yeah, so definitely more than just what you would call, I think, a regular churchgoer.
Mm.
And your brother is still a deacon?
Yeah, so he is a deacon. He switched churches and I think became a deacon I kind of don't ask questions anymore. I'm like, cool.
For sure.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah,
I'm
we
just
understand
trying. I'm quickly
Just kinda
putting in. Yeah, no, I get it. Right. No, we don't. We just talked about this on our last podcast,
Yeah.
just Zach and I, that like we are learning how to put strong boundaries up with any conversation that has to do with religion or politics with our family, and things are going substantially better moving forward. And so, but just kind of putting in perspective. Okay, so you have one sibling, an older brother. He's a deacon at maybe a different church. Your parents are still working in the ministry, and you are the only one in your immediate family who is no longer religious?
Yeah, I have definitely self-proclaimed myself as the scapegoat and the black sheep of the family, for sure.
Join us. Wow, nice to have you here in,
Yeah.
kind company.
Yeah.
What we like to say on this podcast is some of us get out alive and not all of us do.
Yeah.
And so we're happy to hear that it sounds like you're not only out alive, but you're thriving in your life, which I hope to get to that point of our conversation of where you're at now. But let's just start with your child, unless you want to say something.
Is it just your brother as a sibling? So it's you and your brother?
So just one brother. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Give us as a kid, from what you remember, how much did you go to church then as a kid throughout the week?
Yeah. So we were the standard, obviously Sunday morning, but that included Sunday school. And then there was evening church at 6 p.m. that we had to go to. And then there was Wednesday night church, which often involved an hour prior to that youth group. And then oftentimes, because of my dad's duties as a deacon, he had to close up. So we would be at church for so many hours in a given week. And this didn't even include outside projects, whether it was like throwing an event for a women's group or, vacation Bible school, or my mom would produce these wild, like Christmas plays and things like that. And so it was it felt like my upbringing in a whole was school, sports, church, wake up, do it all over again. And what's very interesting is that, so our church grew. So when I turned about the age of 10, we built a whole entire new church, and we used what was our current church as our youth building. So we grew this church and ended up, there were over 600 members. It was pretty big. And we're in a pretty small town. Asheville isn't that big. It's a very small, what you would call big city. And everybody does kind of know everybody. And what's very interesting about Asheville, North Carolina, for those people that don't know, is that it's actually very liberal. And within the city itself, it's like really progressive. But anything directly outside of the city is very like, homegrown, grassroots, just Southern living, right? And that very much has to do with church. So it wasn't just, all of my immediate friends that, I went to public school with and played sports with were a part of the church. It was also friends of friends that were heavily involved in church, and then of course you would have like people here and there that were not, but I'm sure as you guys were probably encouraged to not really associate with people like that, like not really associate with, quote, people of the world and keep it within, our small community. So that was essentially from the moment I was born, there was no other way of being. And it's very interesting because about the entire mentality and essentially the dogma of the indoctrination, it's been wild because truthfully, thanks to you guys and some other people on social media, I have realized like, so much of my story, so much of my trauma, so much of what I've been through is because of my religious trauma. And it's interesting because it's not something, this is truthfully the first time that I've openly talked about this. So I'm really excited.
Yeah.
Here on the Moral Combat podcast, honestly, thank you so much. Your story sounds so similar,
so
to
familiar,
ours,
yeah,
and so familiar, and just the terminology you're using, like of the world,
and woman's group and men's
woman's
group,
right?
Youth group. These things like, you went to church not only Sundays but Wednesdays, and then you also they were to close, and then you had a night church. Like church is every single second of your life. It's everything.
Yes, whether you are in it or not, like. That's what we're doing today, know? Yeah. No, I mean, thank you guys so much. Don't stop doing this podcast. I mean, it's been a huge part of my growth journey, and I've sent it to past friends and, people that I went to church with, that are kind of figuring this stuff out too. And they're like, what? Yeah. This is a thing? I thought I was crazy, and you gaslight yourself because it's such, the Bible and the messages that were given from such a very impressionable age. It is like the word of God is truth, and once you kind of break that glass ceiling of like, well, actually, hang on, let me start to question some of these things. It can feel like the floor is just dissolving out from under you because everything that you've always known to be true and keep you, quote, safe and give you direction in life and give you some sort of moral fiber and standing is now not even real. Like it almost, it feels that way, right? Like I was talking to my husband, which he has been amazing throughout this whole entire journey. And I'll kind of get into our relationship and how that's, been such a support system. But I was telling him, I was looking at him and I was like, I feel like my life was the Truman Show.
Yeah. Yeah, dude. Even just you mentioning that movie, I'm like, yep.
100%.
Yeah.
It's easy to see, I know you talk about you have family. It sounds like you love very much still involved in the church. And so it's not hard. It's not too hard to like see them and be like, they're living in the Truman Show. It's almost like it's almost easier to see how much of a Truman Show it was when you have personal people you love still doing it and embracing it and teaching it and trying to get more people to come to it. You're like, it's just a show.
Yeah. And they make it every part of your life too. So like all your dreams and aspirations, as I was growing up, felt like I had to have God in front of it, God first. So it was like, if I wanted to be a musician, it's like, well, it's for worship. It's for God. If I wanted to take basketball further, it was in the name of the Lord, I'll take basketball further.
Yeah.
And it was never
Literally.
for you. It was always separated.
Yeah.
And you said that sorry, go ahead. Yeah, you go ahead.
I was going to say, like, it kind of hijacks your identity.
100%.
And so the way that my story goes, I moved away at age 26 to Ohio, and it allowed me so much freedom. Like, for the first time in my life, I felt like I could breathe. And it's interesting though, because you truly don't have a sense of self. And I mean, I remember walking around constantly waiting for somebody to tell me who I was, because that's all I knew was for, people, whether it was Sunday school teachers or the preacher or my parents or whoever, would project to me who I was and who I was expected to be through the eyes of God and the eyes of the Bible and all of that, right? And so I remember having no sense of self at all, because we weren't allowed to. That wasn't safe, because if you do, then it takes you out of that mold, right? And that's threatening to the entire narrative, which ultimately is kind of control at the end of the day, right?
100%.
Yeah.
Damn. Clip that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Done.
Make some shorts out of that one. Sense of self, sense of identity. I liked the analogy you just used of punching through the glass ceiling, and something that our Father to this day reminds us or tries to enforce in us since I was born was the truth shall set you free. The truth shall set you free. The truth shall set you free. Recently, and I'm plugging this because it was such a lesson, the recent Cat Williams podcast that broke the internet, so much about that was the truth is going to set people free. And I think that being raised in this Christian religion, this idea of truth, when you're told it's just there's one truth, right? Black and white, one way or the highway, that is the truth. And I think what's wild about your analogy is it does feel like that there is a ceiling when you're a Christian and when you're taught that, and you look up and you are seeing that truth. But if you can see through that truth and realize and you punch through it, it's not that the sky or whatever is above that roof is it. It's there's billions of homes everywhere and they all have different roofs and there's all these different trees. It's almost like this idea of reality becomes reality. Right? And you can actually smell and feel for the first time. And this idea of being reborn in the faith, what I've always told people in the past that are so confused why I would walk away, I would say, that feeling you got when you gave your life to Christ and you were reborn. I was like, I got that same exact feeling when I walked away from Christ.
Yeah.
And people are like, they can't, they don't know how to, it's just like, what? And I'm like, I know that's hard. But that's how it feels, right? It's almost the same way that people change their entire lives when they become Christians. Every single part of my life, for me, became like, everything that has nothing to do with Christianity, I'm embracing, and it became so easy for me to like attach to all these different, whatever it was.
Yeah.
When you were 26, you moved to Ohio. That's when you would say your entire life got shook. Everything changed.
Yeah.
How about what pushed you to move to Ohio?
Yeah, why Ohio?
Well, that's the juicy part. So let's definitely get into that.
Yeah, let's go there.
So to kind of paint the picture, but up to that point, and kind of talk about school a little bit more. So, we talked about me being at church constantly and just constantly being involved. And what was very interesting, obviously, there was a form of being sheltered growing up that came with all of this, and not really being able to see things in any other way, right? And it specifically meaning if you reject God, that equals death. So all of my survival mechanisms, as I'm sure you guys have experienced this, are turned on all of the time. And even so for me, I know one of the two of you would be more apt to question, isn't that right? When you were younger and just kind of ask some hard
That
questions.
was Nate. Yeah. Nate was straight from 15. He was leaving the church very young. Yeah.
Wow. So for me, it was very interesting because what we're finding is that people that grew up, and we can see this in like the boomer population specifically, in abusive homes, it's interesting because they would find organized religion to give them some sense of structure, of safety. And going back, I'm like, wow, this was just a means for both of my parents in their traumatic experiences, which they both had very hard upbringings, to be able to give that sense of stability to themselves and us. And I'm like, wow, that's a very interesting way to look at it. And so my whole approach now, and this comes in waves, I have moments where I'm very pissed off and I'm really fucking over it. And I just want to like burn the world down, right? Like you go through.
Oh, we get it. Yeah, we get it.
Yep. But it's so interesting because it's like, I'm like, okay, that's the backstory. Noted. Interesting. And I can kind of like be mad and then have this level of me that also sees them without judgment, right? So like all of this is set up. And I mean, it was to the point in my middle school that there was about like a year and a half span of time where there was this like, I'll say outbreak of revival happening within Western North Carolina. And there would be these tent revivals off the highway. And every single week, a different church would lead these revivals. And it was to the point of like, the kids were taking over the schools. They were going out and evangelizing other kids. I mean, to the point I remember there was some, God knows where they got this number, but it was like, oh yeah, thanks to just the kids at our church, 150 souls have been saved this year. Like just at my middle school. And I'm like, wow, I'm going to get such a reward for this. Like, I'm going to be so blessed for this. And so you're doing all the things, right? Well, there was a boy that I ended up dating in middle school in 8th grade.
Wow.
Okay. This guy also went to my church. So here comes the purity culture thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm in middle school, I'm enjoying life, I'm not really thinking about sex so much. And then like high school hits, the hormones hit, everything kind of hits at once.
Yep.
And you're having all these expectations, right? So I dated this guy from middle school to the summer of my senior year.
Wow.
Yeah. So basically, we as a couple went to that same church the entire time. We are in the throes of learning everything possible about purity culture because that's like all the youth group is talking about.
Yeah.
And of course, we are constantly made to be a spectacle. We're constantly made to be an example. Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, I can remember instances where we, like all the quote younger couples that were not married were like, we had to stand up in church. And it's like, you as a congregation are supposed to keep these kids accountable to stay pure. We basically went through a period of time until my ex-boyfriend and I kind of got sick of it, that we had to sit on the front row of the pew at our giant church every Sunday.
Yeah.
So that way we could be watched.
They would ask you, they would tell you like, please sit here.
Yeah.
Or where's the expectation there?
It was the expectation. Like at first it was like told and then it was just,
okay.
Right. So we eventually kind of got tired of it and phased that part out. Here's what gets good. In 8th grade, you know, we're just starting to get to know each other. We go on a Wednesday night to, so we had 2 levels. The lower level was the Sunday school classrooms. Mm. So we and like a couple of our friends would go down there in the classrooms, door would be open, and we just like hang out and talk or whatever, get away from the adults for a minute. And well, our other friends left. The light is off for some reason. So my boyfriend and I start making out. That was my first kiss that I ever had, was in the Sunday school room of my church in middle school in 8th grade. Here's where it gets good. So one of my best friends growing up, and I'm sure you guys can probably think of that kid in church where it was like they were thoughtless. Like they totally followed every rule. You're like, they've never done a bad thing, not even one thing. So this was this girl, and she and I were best friends. Her dad was the head of the deacon board, and he just so happened to walk by at that exact moment that I am making out with my 8th grade boyfriend.
Oh, no.
Your best friend's dad, who's a deacon.
Yeah. Perfect timing.
Because God's always watching. Don't you know that?
Yep. He didn't know what to do or say. And he just kind of like, his eyes got really big and he just like walked away.
Nice.
Well, here's what was very interesting about the way that our deacon board is run, and I would say like the administration of the church, in that I am intuitively learning now as an adult. So they would have weekly meetings, and luckily I would say in terms of that I know of, our church is probably like I didn't hear anything of like sexual abuse or anything crazy or anything like that going on. Like I think our church, for the most part, everybody meant well, and they were pretty loving in the ways that they knew how, right? Mm-hmm. The thing was, I know at the same time, there was a lot of stuff that got dealt with on the back end in a very hush-hush way. So a big stipulation of going to these meetings for my dad was that he could not share anything. And every once in a while, something would slip out to my mom and she would tell me. Well, apparently I was never dealt with. He got in a lot of trouble for me kissing my boyfriend. Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know if there was any like specific repercussion or anything that happened, but there's more, and a similar story happened to him later. But I could just tell it was very interesting learning later, like, wow, the way they deal with things is very, like, I don't know a good word for it, maybe subversive, or just like behind the scenes.
Because it's his fault, right? Technically.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, in the church's eyes, it's like your father has failed the church by allowing you to be that person. It's a really gross way to look at it.
When did you find that? When did you make that connection that that's how these things are being dealt with?
It was a few weeks later. My mom was like, your dad got in a lot of trouble for that. Like guilting me, shaming me as they do.
God. Yeah,
right?
Of course. Yeah.
And I was like, so what am I supposed to do? And I remember her just being kind of disgusted. And she's like, you just need to figure yourself out. This is like unacceptable. There was never any solution. It was just abstain. It was just keep a Bible's width in between you. Don't touch, Luckily, my parents weren't so strict of like, oh, you can't hold hands or, kiss, but they, the obvious stuff, it was a no for them. Mm-hmm. But it was just very interesting. I was like, wow, my human nature, like something as natural as breathing is now I feel so disgusting. Mm-hmm. And then it just like escalated from there.
How so?
So as we got into learning about purity culture, and so as my perspective as a woman, which I know you guys were like at one point, hey, we would love to have a perspective of a woman about purity culture. And that's immediately when I messaged you guys. I was like, oh my God.
Wow. And I want you, when you say that, you are the first woman that we've had on our podcast. Yeah. So mad respect for you stepping out vulnerably like this to do this, because we went through an extreme amount of purity culture. One thing that I found really interesting before we continue on from this story that I heard you say is, I think there's a lot we could talk about that feeling of that sexual shame of just being a human person and being like, we can relate to that so much. One thing that it sounds different in your Baptist church experience growing up for your dad, because our dad's a pastor. And he had plenty of deacons and people that worked underneath him. And there wasn't that sort of things were pretty hush, but they're like parents. It didn't seem like parents got in trouble for their kids' ways. It was almost like in our experience, the kids were used as an example of sin. So it'd be like, hey, that person's kid, you stay away from them.
Yeah.
But their parents would still come to the church.
Yeah. But
then like our parents would help them through their struggling kid because they know how hard it is. And the kid would just slowly get ostracized out of everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas your experience was like your dad, what did it feel like being a daughter or a woman? And how did it make you feel seeing your dad being the one suffering for your inadequacies or whatever?
Yeah. And it's interesting that you mentioned that version too of the kids kind of get ostracized at some point, because there were future examples that come about where girls did get pregnant and that exact thing happened. So I'll totally get into that too. Well, what's interesting is that you have to kind of understand the relationship with my dad and I. And there's always been this chasm between the two of us. I think I was incarnated on this earth to frustrate the hell out of him. So add this one to the list, right?
Yeah.
Like, and at the same time, like, he loves me to death, and I love so many aspects of my dad. And there's so many dichotomies to these parental relationships. So
Totally.
I kind of was like, that sucks, but and there's nothing I can do about it. I wish that I had the version of me now in my 8th grade shoes, because totally. I would have said something, you know what I mean? But like, younger self doesn't know any better. You're just literally trying to follow the rules and not step on a landmine, Totally. So it's like, well, I don't want to make this situation worse. He naturally operates just because of his life experiences from a deep, deep place of guilt and shame as it is. And same with my mom, right? So with their life experiences, it was, you better not draw any attention to the negative things about our family, because we need to put on this, outward facing appearance of we have it all together. And the thing is, it wasn't just a facade, like, especially from my mom's end, it was believed wholeheartedly. Like, we have it together. You need to present that way, So basically imagine having like a highly critical mother, a dad that operates from deep, deep shame and like projects his shame on me constantly. So I'm like, I'm better off if I just leave this alone and go on to live my life.
Yeah, totally.
And that was 26.
That was till 26, no?
Yeah.
When you say like, I got to get on move my life, you're still at the house doing this? Like,
yeah. So
while you're with that. Yeah.
Yeah. So the boyfriend, we stayed together. I think I was like 18 and a half, maybe 19. So that essentially was that whole story. And then there's like the in-between stories of purity culture of, like, I can remember, going to summer camp, and we went with another church, which was even more conservative. And we had to wear, do you guys know what culottes are?
What was that?
Culottes?
Culottes. Do you know what those are?
No.
Like cool lots?
I think that's how you pronounce it. If listeners go Google what the hell this is.
So obviously, we don't know what that is. What are they?
Okay. Like, imagine an older, larger woman and the type of shorts that she would wear.
Yeah.
PE
slightly below the knee.
Kind of go up in the crotch a little bit.
Yep. Really. Yep. High rise.
Oh, got you.
You got me with PE teacher. I'm like, nope, I see it. I see it exactly who it is.
So we, as the women, were instructed to wear culottes and baggy shirts that were not light colored the entire duration of this summer camp. And me being who I am, I was like, I will not be doing that. And I wore my brother's cargo shorts. I'm like, I need to at least look halfway cool. Like, I will not be doing that.
Rebel.
And it was crazy because, of course, like the guys were given no stipulations. They could like run around with their shirts off. They could wear a tank top. It was no big deal. And this was like, it was hot as balls, you guys. Like it was like 100 degrees. There was no air conditioning. And so we were instructed like on swim day to swim on one side of the lake. And then there was this like island type thing. And then the guys would be on the other side.
Damn.
Well, we were instructed to wear a one-piece bathing suit, shorts, and a baggy t-shirt over top of everything. Mind you, the guys couldn't even see us. Like we weren't even in eye shot. And I can still remember to this day how angry I was when I realized the guys had no dress code at all whatsoever. And I just remember like hearing these old-fashioned preachers just talk of the shame, you know, women should feel about presenting their body. And I'm sitting here like, why? And then the story starts to unfold. And I'm like, so it's because you, and I'm not like projecting this at all men, love men, they're great. Like, it's because men can't control their thoughts and impulses?
100%. Especially in the church, that's how they perceive it for sure.
I mean, that's definitely how they enforced and made us believe that as kids, that we wouldn't ever have the ability to control ourselves. So it would be in our best nature to be with women that protected us from that.
Having to control.
How would we be able to control that?
Yeah.
You can't control our impulses.
No.
Yeah. And it was interesting because, I mean, I had a relationship with my boyfriend and like the younger guys, I was like a guy's girl and like I would hang out with the guys more than the girls typically. And to be able to get their perspectives on it and just be like, it's not that big of a deal. Like, okay, that's just the way that it's presented from them. And in my mind, I'm like, okay, this is just the older culture, you know, and it's creepy. Like, I remember being so upset because I think I was like 11 and there was a basketball court pretty close to the gym. I loved basketball. And I needed a ride because all my friends were going and everybody left. And I was like, I don't want to be left out. I really want to go. And the youth pastor was still there. And I asked my parents, I was like, can I just get a ride with him real quick, you know, over to the gym? Which I get it. Like, I get why it happened the way that it did. But he told me no. So everybody, like all my friends are there but me. Because, and the painful part was, I was like, well, why? And he couldn't answer me. Like if he would have just said something like, it's just not going to be a good look, I'd have been like, oh yeah, I guess that makes sense. But he didn't say anything and he kind of just left. And so I'm sitting here like, is something wrong with me? Like, you know? So there was all these like strange, just weird, insidious things that would happen over time. And I mean, the dress codes even at our church were pretty strict. You know, we weren't a household where I had to wear a skirt all the time. It tried to venture into that territory. And then the girls eventually were like, nah, like that's a little too far. You know, we're not the Duggards, so I'm not going to do that. So basically, like I remember an instance in winter camp. And they put a girl in charge that was a year older than me. And she pulls me aside. I'm wearing a tank top that day, like literally just like this. She pulls me aside. She's like, you're going to have to go home. As soon as we got there, you're going to have to go home. I was like, why? Your tank top is showing way too much skin. It is less than 3 finger widths. This is unacceptable. And like goes into she kind of just started to slut shame me. I was like,
This is a basketball camp?
No, it's a winter camp.
Winter camp.
This is a winter camp. Yeah. And so I was like, are you sure about that? Did you talk to anybody about this? Because I'm like, this feels very extreme. You're going to send me all the way home when we just got here.
Yeah.
And she goes to an adult and, basically, they go into this room for 45 minutes and come back out. And they're like, no, you can stay. You just don't wear that shirt again. It's way too revealing. It's like,
45 minutes.
Yeah.
Like, Lord. Yeah.
The dress codes is an interesting thing because that wasn't brought to my attention until later in life. And as a man, I lived with my sister in New Orleans for a little bit, and I remember her and I deconstructing a little bit. And she told me that she's like, that was like one of the biggest things that started to push her away was this: men have no dress code and women have to cover everything.
Really?
Yeah.
She said that?
And like the weirdest thing though is I didn't process that was going on until I was 24, 25, sitting there with her and her being like, don't you see how that's weird? How you guys could walk around at camps with your shirts off and girls had to have shirts over their bathing suits. I was like, not until this very second. And so It's interesting that from a woman's perspective, it's like instantly y'all are like, these dress codes are nuts. And as a man, I'm like, we're protecting the purity though. We're protecting them and me. And it's like all like accepted until you get to an age where you're like, that's weird, dude. There's some weird protection going on there.
It's so bizarre. It's so bizarre. Like I at one point remember thinking, maybe if you guys release some tension somehow sexually, like in a proper way, you wouldn't project all this on us. Like,
totally.
You know what I mean? Because so what ended up happening, I still think that I deserve a trophy for this. So I ended up, my boyfriend and I broke up, but we ended up staying essentially pure. We didn't ever go all the way. We did other stuff, but we didn't go all the way. And the poor guy, I remember shaming him and blaming him and being like, you're the one that's supposed to, just kind of like projecting my irresponsibility and being like, you don't respect me and this and that. Right after I had heard like some sermon on it. And, so the poor guy got it pretty bad. But yeah, so I ended up, we broke up, and then here's where things escalate.
This is what, after senior year of high school?
Yeah.
To put in perspective.
So like 19, somewhere around there.
19. Yep. So my choice with college, I was encouraged to not go to any sort of university or anything more than a community college.
Yep.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I was just about to ask you that. How was education the influence in your church?
It was, looking back, that is probably one of the things that makes my blood boil the most. Because what happens is when you get outside of your tiny bubble and you start to, even objectively, because here's the thing, people that deconstruct, it's not like they are going out looking to leave the faith, right? It is, and it kills me because people that are still in the faith and converse with them, they're like, well, you never knew Jesus anyway.
Yeah.
You never accepted him anyway. It was never real for you. No, a lot of the times it's those people, it was the most real for. Like they were very, very steeped in what they were doing. And when you get outside of your one perspective that you have had your whole life, you're finally allowed to ask questions. And that's something that I realized, like, wow, anytime I would ever ask a question, it's totally shut down and totally disregarded or dismissed. And they basically, my parents especially from their end, and not to say that like some of the kids didn't go to universities, but it was constantly preached. Like, we need to keep these kids close to home as much as possible, and to prevent them from getting out into the world and getting involved in all this, drugs and sex and all this stuff that happens in college. It's just not a good place for it. So what was interesting was a lot of my friends would go to Liberty University. Have you guys ever heard of Liberty before?
Liberty sounds pretty familiar.
Is it a Christian college?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds familiar.
You basically, there were like all these stipulations. If you had somebody of the opposite sex, like in your dorm, I think it was like you could like lose your scholarship and you'd have all these penalties, and it was just wild. So I thought like, oh, maybe I'll go there. And I remember my parents like shutting it down. And mind you, they didn't go to college. So they kind of like didn't know how to even navigate the scene. So it was like, well, if anything, you should probably go to a community college. So this is a conversation I'm having with my parents at 15. And so I decide to become a skincare specialist. So I'm like, okay, go to the local community college for a year and I'll have my certificate and I can make, decent money. And I remember though, kind of wondering for sure, okay, is that what I want to do? Asking my mom, we were sitting down with a counselor and her being like, here's the amounts of money you can make with these different careers. The counselor saying this, and my mom being like, you don't really need that, just like shutting it down. And I'm just like, damn, the hindsight. So I go to community college. I meet a good friend there. She introduces me to my first husband. Here's where it gets interesting. So
it's all been interesting, by the way. This has all been very interesting.
Keep going.
So basically, my whole intent was, and this was the expectation, was you graduate high school, you find a good godly man, and you have babies immediately.
Yep.
I remember getting back the day after my honeymoon and going to church in the evening and having 3 people ask me, so when are you guys having kids? And I was like, excuse me, let me breathe. Give me a second. And the thing was, mind you, I got married as a virgin, as a technical virgin. And like the big reason, to be super honest, to rush into marriage was so I could have sex.
Yep.
I pushed it and pushed it and pushed it. We were dating about a year. We got engaged. Within 2 years of dating, we got married. Wow. The lessons that had been learned in that time. So we were married for about 5 years. And, if there's anybody below the age of 26 listening to this, I'm here to tell you, you don't even know who the fuck you are until you're like 26, 27, remotely.
Yeah.
Give yourself some time. Don't rush anything. So
agreed.
I get married at 20 years old. It was like the picture perfect wedding. And things are pretty good for the first year, second year. And to give a idea of this guy's character, everybody called him Prince Charming. Like he knew what people wanted to hear. He would turn it on. For those 6 years of my life, I did not touch a single door handle. Like he was just a gentleman of gentlemen, and basically I started to notice like, you act totally different at home. This is kind of weird. And he would avoid me. Like he would work until 9 p.m. at night. He started to like barely talk to me. And I was like, this is weird. And I'm a very like deep thinker and I want to talk and like connection is so important for me. And my younger self didn't completely understand that and didn't have a way to communicate my needs. So of course, it results in resentment, in a lack of communication, more division, right? Well, something was really going on with him. And I was like, something's not right. Something's up. We end up, by the way, like so sex after being celibate for so long and being taught that it is so dirty is a freaking adventure because you're automatically supposed to like flip this switch in your brain of like, hey, this is okay now. And like, something still felt very dirty about it. So I had to like coach myself into being like, you're safe, you're okay, this isn't bad, you're not going to go to hell for this. Like, there's no reason to feel this disgust with yourself and your body. Like, because here's something I'm not sure that men realize when women are taught that their value is so deeply embedded in their sexuality and in their body. You can start to try to idealize yourself as a woman and be like, how can I become the perfect sex object? Without like tempting a man, but, making my body perfect, trying to look perfect all the time. So I started to notice when I was about like 23, perfection was the theme. So, I mean, in every aspect, because it wasn't just, oh, in my church, you know, once you're saved, that's great. It was constant of like the one bit of scripture that sticks in my mind that I can remember being a teenager and having the thought, why even try? Is when a Sunday school teacher taught us about our righteousness is as of filthy rags before God. And I just remember like, and I've always had a deep connection to the divine since I was very, very little. And I remember being like, that's not right. God doesn't view us that way. Somebody's telling us that, but that's not right. But eventually I bought into the narrative and I was like, well, if that's what I'm supposed to do, like everything's got to be perfect. So like you're a new adult, you're trying to figure out career, you don't know what the hell you're doing in a marriage and like relationships, keeping a house perfect. And I remember having this like trauma response of freeze. And I wasn't going to bed until like 2 a.m. because I was just avoiding feeling things. And like, it ended up, my husband and I didn't have sex for 2 years.
Wow.
And I would come on to him. I would like try to do these things and he would reject me. And I was like, it's me. And I'm not trying hard enough. And I'm not like the not good enough narrative could never be loud enough. Right. And so my self-talk was absolutely poisonous. It was just constant tearing myself down, like constant ridicule, constant criticism. There was no self-love or appreciation at all for any win. So inevitably, this developed into eating disorders. So at the age, at about age 21, 22, I'm about 5'6" for reference. I got down to 105 pounds.
Wow.
Yeah. I lost my menstrual cycle for 3 years.
Wow.
I could remember putting both of my hands like around my thigh and there being like a gap because there was still space.
Wow.
And like my fingers would easily touch. And I could like sit down and feel my sits bones like in pain against the chair beneath me because I had no like body mass at all. And there was one specific time I was in church and there's like so many nuanced stories beneath like this portion of my life.
No doubt. Yeah.
But I remember being in church and feeling heart palpitations and like knowing that I was about to have a heart attack. And I had that moment of like bargaining with God and I remember like sweating and just staying as still as possible so nobody picked up on anything being wrong. And I could feel myself getting lightheaded and I like started to just slow my breathing down and like made that deal with God of, if you get me through this, I will figure this out because I know that what I'm doing, something's wrong and I got to figure it out. And like slowly everything came back to normal. It was the weirdest to this day experience I've ever had. So it ended up becoming, transitioned out of that just through a series of events into binge eating disorder. So over the course of 3 months, I ended up gaining over 60 pounds. A lot of different kind of self-loathing came with that because I was like still celibate with my husband. And there was this moment in time where I had been binging for 5 hours straight and I was like, discomfort isn't even the word for it. I always joked. I was like, I was too much of a bitch to make myself throw up. So I'm like sitting in extreme pain, laying over a yoga ball. And this was the moment where everything flipped. I was crying and I was in such a dark place. I was on the precipice of like, there's no way out but one way. And I'm just ready to escape this life.
Yeah.
And right as I was about to start into that thought, this voice that was not mine, because mind you, too, I was very mean to myself during that period of time, came in and was like, what if you just loved yourself? What if you saw yourself the way that I see you? The way that you would see a puppy or a kitten with the innocence and beauty that that creature has. That's how I see you. And I was like, whoa. So, fast forward, I ended up leaving the marriage. And
at what age? What age did you leave the marriage?
So I left at age 26.
Okay. Is that when you moved?
We're getting to go Ohio.
Yeah, now we're on to Ohio, baby.
Now it's coming together. So it was like at that moment, my intuition, which I had been so deeply connected with as a child, just cracked back open. Like it was like in that moment, I remembered who the fuck I was and like all of the beauty that God sees me in. And I was like, this isn't how I'm supposed to be living life. So some things progressed. It turns out my ex-husband had some extreme trauma that he was very secretive about, and that was the source of the pain there. Couldn't be resolved. So we ended up, I left him. And the thing was, in me leaving him, because of his persona and the repertoire that he had within the church and our friend group, essentially, which was also inside the church, mind you, he is sitting in about to be a deacon. Like he has like a Sunday left. And I like announced that I'm leaving him essentially. And so basically this is where I left the church. So for the first time in my life, I'm on my own and no one has reached out. And then all of a sudden a couple people reach out, but then it was like this, in this way of like, why did you leave? You know, what's your problem? And I had to sit down with my girlfriends. Two of them left just entirely disgusted with me. They were, you know, part of the church. Their husbands were preachers and things of that nature. One was meeting with me with concern and confusion. The others were like, you're dead to us. So because the thing was, I left what seemed very abruptly because I didn't reach out for help, because I was like, nobody is going to believe me based on his reputation and how he presents. Like people are going to think that, you know, I'm making this up. So I ended up just kind of leaving. And it was wild because my parents ended up for months, they wouldn't talk to me. So the whole family and support system that I had my entire life abandoned me as soon as I needed them. And as soon as I was myself, like feeling confused and trying to figure this out. And that was kind of a side story for me because I was like trying to heal at the same time and like figure out my feelings. And it ended up getting malicious. So there was an instance where my ex-husband's, one of his friends that was a part of a different church, and he was actually a preacher's kid. He ended up stalking me at the place I was living. He would send me like pictures from a night vision camera, like burner phone to my phone of my place.
That's wild.
I had no money. I was trying to sell my stuff at a yard sale and nobody came. And I was like, this makes no sense. Like I've advertised this, like what's happening? Turns out like people had taken my yard sale signs down, like that knew the situation. It was bad.
Wow. And this is you trying to move to Ohio and leave?
This is me just trying to move out of the house that I had been living in with my husband. So Ohio wasn't even a factor yet.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is like right at your, like the divorce has happened. Everyone in your life that supposedly loves you has left you. There's like one friend that kind of cares a little bit about the truth, but they're like, I don't know. And you're like, I got to sell some shit to make some money. No one's buying your shit.
There's someone stalking you.
Yeah.
night vision alone is like scary just to see on a movie.
Seriously.
Right? Like, imagine getting that. Like, that's horrible.
That is terrible.
Yeah.
That sounds terrifying.
But like, also, what and in like amazing proof, like right? Did you feel sort of validated in the moment of like, or like kind of aware of like all of it as it was happening, that this community was?
What was interesting was this wasn't really a belief that I had yet. It kind of proved itself and came out of nowhere. Like, I automatically going about this was like, people will eventually understand, like, this is going to be hard, but they're my family. Like, this, you see kind of some aspects of like, that's kind of weird. I don't understand that, but it's like, this is just life. And then all of a sudden it was like, whoosh, just the veil was lifted. And it's like, no, this is the nature. If you are not adhering verbatim to what is expected of you, you will be abandoned. Mm-hmm. So it's like people are going to choose the church over you as an individual soul. Mm-hmm. So what was wild was this. So it was a few months I was on my own. I ended up meeting my now husband and we just hit it off. And he's Catholic, like he grew up Catholic. So he knows nothing of the culture that I speak of.
Yeah.
True. Like I would tell him stuff and he'd be like, that's weird. So anyway, so he was the first person in my life to meet me for my soul's essence and not judge it. Like he, in every way, like at my worst or my best, he's like, I love the shit out of you. You know what I mean? And I was like, whoa, so this is unconditional love. This is interesting. And as things progressed, I ended up moving to Ohio about like 6 months later because I was like, I'm so ready to get out of here. Everybody's abandoned me. Eventually my parents came back around and just started like asking questions, but they've all still kind of had the stink eye of like, okay, it's still suspicious, but we love you. So moving to Ohio, and truthfully, I wouldn't say that I have deconstructed, to be very honest, until this year. And I have been in Ohio since 2016.
Yeah.
So I just hadn't gone back to church. And I'm so grateful for the progression of my experience because it was never like, I'm leaving the church. It was like, I'm going to move and go like live my life. And then I was like, interesting. Like my anxiety's gone. Oh, wow. I healed my eating disorders because I found meditation and was able to tap into my intuition.
Yeah.
And then starting to self-heal and being like, whoa, I was really fucked up.
Yeah.
And then here we are now.
Yeah.
So that's been the story.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of people's way out.
Amazing.
Not everyone does what Nate did at 15 and like, I'm not a Christian at 15,
But so much of, first off, like, if this is the first time you've expressed this story like this, that was incredibly well done. It seems like you've had a lot of amazing self-reflection and time to really think about your experiences. And I relate so much. There's so much that you've experienced that I'm learning from just listening to you. I've made some connections to like the connections in your past to where you talked about this youth pastor taking you to the basketball or the gym or whatever it was. And then he was like, just walked away and you were like, is it me? Am I doing something wrong? And how that familiarity led into your marriages, like your first, relation, like how the no sex in your marriage and you're like, is it me? Is it me? Like there's this connection to your childhood, to your adulthood, and how there's like familiarity in these relationships with the men in your life. And how one person, this simple fact of like, I really do love you regardless of your inadequacies. Same experience I had with my fiance now. And I deconstructed, sure. I had a really good friend of mine who was in the same church, who was a brilliant book reader, who started smoking weed at a young age, who did all the things that I was so scared of. And he was always there like, when you're ready, I'm here, because I found out some shit. And so like I had access to one person who loved me as a friend
Wow.
when the whole entire rest of my family and friends of the church and everybody else continued to shun me more and more just for having this idea of free thought. And I think that it really only takes one individual to give, like when you're a kid, when you're raised with this and you're just, to give you a little glimpse of what it feels like to be loved. Like this, like, what is love, right? We're taught love is one thing, but then when you actually feel, and there's so much that you shared that I'd love to keep talking about, but I think like my first question, which I know you probably have a question, but was it easy, instead of like just jumping right into all your past, but like the moment you felt that love, this feeling of like, oh, this is different. Wow, this is interesting. Like, this is different. Was it easy for you to like just accept that type of love? Did it feel weird at first? Did you reject it? Did you have like, how did that go?
Oh, hell no, it wasn't easy.
Yeah.
I know, dude.
We're taught that we're not worthy and we need
Yeah.
to give.
Yeah.
And like, that's something about Southern culture, especially as a woman in Southern culture. Like, you are expected to drain every ounce of your vital life force for everybody around you for the sake of the greater good, because blessings, you know?
Yeah,
So-
it's true.
So like, I had what we would call like a wounded feminine aspect, right? Like receivership. I have had to really work on that. And I've had my defenses up, and my husband's hilarious. He's like, shut the fuck up. Let me love you. Like, take it. But, I'm so blessed to have had him. And I mean, I've had great friends outside of the church here and there along the way to like, I've constantly just needed a mirror to believe it for myself, because I had never been able to think my own thoughts. So I constantly had to look for proof and validation outside of myself to affirm that I was even lovable, and, it's taken years, but now I can affirm it for myself. So oh man, that has been the work.
Wow. Did you want to say something?
I just wanted to comment on this. We were raised, speaking for all three of us here, we were raised with our family and everyone else surrounding us, loving God, loving Jesus, and then we're below it. And I think just that alone has its consequences on how we now have a tough time receiving love, because we were never supposed to receive it anyway. We're supposed to receive it through God. Almost like this umbrella of Jesus and God are up here, and then we're all below it.
I mean, isn't that the book of Hebrews? It says, deny yourself, pick up your cross and walk.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
And it's never you, it's Jesus through you.
Yeah.
It's never actually self.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as self.
Did you ever hear the saying, be in the world, but not of the world?
Oh, of course.
Okay. It's interesting to ask that to people growing up in different denominations, because some denominations they weren't told that.
Or they're not evangelical.
Or they're not evangelical.
Right?
Yeah.
Evangelical is this idea is you're here for one purpose and one purpose only. The world is dying. It is dying. It's a world of death.
Yeah.
How many can you save to bring to eternity?
Mm-hmm.
Did you, in your evangelical like upbringing, do you have a lot of people, like how many numbers do you have of people that helped give their life to Christ? Were you that evangelical in your life growing up?
Yeah.
Oh, definitely. Oh, yeah. We were at age 9 on the streets of Gatlinburg, Tennessee, and it's 20 degrees outside with our pockets stuffed full of gospel tracts, stopping poor people on the street and witnessing to them, And I mean, I remember like there was one, as I got older, I wasn't feeling it that night, and I just didn't even try. And I remember feeling so guilty. And to briefly go into the healing aspect of all of this, what is wild, if we look at forms of control of, through religion or just societal things, if we can keep a culture knocked down into the emotion of guilt and shame, you're able to control them.
Yep.
So I think that that's something that we're not talking about enough. Like, even if we're looking at emotions in terms of frequency, right? Guilt and shame are the lowest. They're below depression. Like, it's the bottom of the barrel. And then the very top is like bliss, right? and we can't go from guilt and shame to bliss in one fell swoop. So maybe like to anybody that's listening to this, like as you're healing, understand like when you go through that phase of anger, when you go through that phase of, just resentment, understand that is a better feeling emotion than guilt and shame. And you're on your way.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's a really beautiful connection there. Anger has been and was the guilt and shame and that fear that comes from that, right? Because fear is like that igniting, it's like the match or whatever. And what lights up is the anger. And anger has played such a significant role in the majority of my life in how I handled that guilt and shame. And that's where it kind of capped off. And I like how you said bliss being the top frequency. I have a lot of space for people that suffer from addiction. I found myself finding that, like you're talking about, the bliss for me was like, cannabis was this plant that I was like fighting for because it was helping me sleep at night because I didn't know how to sleep because I suffered from insomnia and all this shit. And my parents were like, that's of the devil, and like kind of ended up getting me kicked out, right? And so because I was so angry at them that they could have so much control over this blissful plant called cannabis, that led, and I'm such a believer in plant medicine and these blissful experiences that can really show you a little bit more, right? Like, hey, this is a frequency that you can reach. In that, what's so scary or what can be so damaging coming out of the church is when you reach that bliss from a substance, you're immediately like, oh, that's the only access I have to that bliss now. Because the moment you come off of it, you're right back down to that guilt and shame times 10, starts that loop of being like, but I want bliss in life. This is how I get it.
Yeah.
And I think that I've met a lot of ex-religious people, mostly Christians, that have gone through that anger, which led to drugs and mostly alcohol as being that blissful feeling. And then there's so much more to, then you have to tackle, right?
Yeah.
And you have these addictions and that shame is separate than just and so there's like this sort of, but I love your positive spin, that anger, you're on the path. It's like, hey, if you're suffering, if you've coming out of this.
Just getting out of the shame, you're
like
on the
anger
path.
means you're at a higher frequency than
that's
that.
all you need.
I've never heard that. And I think that's really, really beautiful. Very well said.
Yeah. And plant medicine has also played a role for me as well. It hasn't been the thing that's played the role, but it's had a very powerful aspect. First, it was meditation and being able to still my mind and being able to actually like release that guilt and shame and that honest, constant stress response that I was in of like, I'm going to die at any moment and like burn, even though I've accepted Christ like multiple times because I've been scared, but it's interesting in finding that delicate dance of using substances to self-soothe. And I'm a very cautious person and I try to be super informed before I jump into anything. That's just kind of always been my nature. And using it as a tool and not as a crutch can be so powerful because for me, cannabis and psilocybin both have allowed me to tap into my subconscious mind, to bring out those suppressed memories and deal with them from a higher place now. Processing it, can be very profound. And honestly, just reminding us of our true kid nature, which is so important. Things get so damn serious in adulthood. And I think sometimes we just need to dance around and play and, come back to that nature. So
totally.
Yeah. Preach. I mean, I know that's a Christian term, but preach. I love that. In something I am, by using different plant medicines to work with my addiction to other plant medicines, I have been learning through the course since I walked away from the church at 15, 16, how at such a young age, the tool that helped me, that plant medicine, cannabis, or that tool was a tool at the same time was like that mother ganja, and replaced and became the mother in a coddling way that I'd never really felt. And that crutch, that help, that hole that night, when I was living on my own for the first time, still is with me today. And I still share that sort of crutch comfort. And I'm having to through years of practice and meditation and all of the things that I'd love to talk to you next about of how you do it. Learning how to accept myself and the crutch and this coddling, necessity or need that I have, and learning how to give that to myself first, right? And like trusting that I am the answer, and like it ends and starts with me. This idea of alpha and omega is me, right? Like,
yeah.
And so, if you're watching this and you're hearing this, like, it's not easy. It's not an easy thing to change that crutch, and like when it is a tool and it is a crutch, right? There's like you said, there's like this delicate balance between like learning how to get through it when it really does help. And so I think that I know that behind you, I see N and L, and I'm assuming that might relate to like never settle life, maybe. Okay. And so you have this business, and I know for all of us, just hearing your story, we relate. Something I've suffered from a lot is this idea of the Jesus complex. This idea of feeling the need that I'm here for a reason, and I can make an impact on the planet, right? Because as Christians and as evangelicals, that's why we were here. And so Zach and I did music for many, many years together, thinking we were like the DJs that were going to bring a new sound to the world that people needed. And here we are many years later, really going through plenty of ego death and growth. But here we are once again leading a podcast or a show that we ultimately want, that we hope makes an impact in this world. And something that I'm working on now in my life is really trying to settle this need for purpose, or this need for that Jesus complex, and trying to really understand it deeper and how deep it goes. And at the same time, feeling called and wanting to lead or wanting to be in these leadership roles. And I see you leading a business, and I see you, and it's around, right? Why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about how you've ended up to being where you are now, given this story you've shared?
Yeah. All right. So Never Settle Lifestyle is a virtually based transformation company. So I'm what I call a transformation expert. I am a holistic nutritionist. I focus on change psychology and energetic work as well. So I am an intuitive, I am a Reiki master, and I also incorporate things like breath work, EFT tapping, meditation. And let's say those things are just not your cup of tea. I work with the general population too on what I would call like the practical side of things, as in, are you taking care of yourself, and how is your self-talk, and like, what are the things that we can clean up to make your life everything that it can be, and you live the most fulfilling life. So to speak into that, deep need for purpose, I think especially if we've been a part of the evangelical church, there's this like really, I don't know if you guys can relate to this, but there feels like this really high mark that we all need to hit in terms of, and you see these kids being like, I'm going to become a preacher, and I'm going to like just whatever they can reach that really high mark to make a really big impact on the world. And what I've discovered in terms of purpose is we need to be comfortable with not having the answers. If we can get comfortable with letting go of expectations and truthfully making sure that you as an individual and, your people local to you, like the people that matter in your life, that all that's taken care of, that's step one. And like, you have to be able to go through that deeper healing work, and it's a process, it's a practice, and it truly never ends. But if you're doing that, you're already on your way. And so when I have people come to me and they're like, I just need to know like what's my purpose? Like, I know I'm meant to do something big in this world, but I just don't know what it is. I don't know where to start. And you can just tell they're kind of like overthinking it. You have to start with that first aspect. And then as your nervous system starts to regulate and feel safe, what it will do is it'll start to let go of control. I find that us as previous Christians have this like obsession with control of like, it's got to be perfect, and we got to do it this very specific way. But the biggest thing that I could tell anybody that's struggling with that is let go of expectations and follow the things that set your heart on fire. So if that means, somebody's listening to this and they're like, I love to crochet. I want to make, stuffed jellyfish and sell them on Etsy. And like, that's my life purpose, which sounds pretty freaking cool to me.
Sounds pretty great.
Go for it.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and two, as someone that also has a podcast and like has experienced different guests and different iterations of it, you never know who you're impacting. You never know who's going to come around the corner and be like, hey, this really changed my life. And you never know where you're going to be and how far along things are going to be 5 years from now. So my question to that is, what's the rush?
Yeah.
Like, enjoy the ride. Because like, I think when we've been conditioned to be such a certain way, it's always about the end goal. It's always about heaven. Right. And it's funny because I've noticed like Christians tend to have a transient sort of lifestyle. Typically, they don't really take care of their body. I'm going to have a perfect body when I'm dead, or I'll, worry about it later or whatever. They don't really take care of the earth because once they're gone, they're gone. It's not their problem anymore. But it's like only because they're thinking about the next thing and they're not in the present. They're not in right now. So just enjoy 100%. Every little moment. That's really all you got to do.
Totally.
I think that's a really interesting point you just made on being an evangelical is not being in the present, never being in the present, because this earth is not heaven. This earth isn't God. Be in the world, not of the world type of mentality. So don't be yourself. Don't even think about yourself, because you're just supposed to die and go to heaven someday, and make sure you save as many people as you possibly can. And that's it. And then it's like finding that self and how that looks. Either it's like, you start to get angry, you start to use cannabis, start to use plant medicine, and then you start to find yourself out of that because you never had a self to begin with. You have to find it now, leaving the faith in a way.
I think like what you were saying too also gets at that every single living thing on this planet, even the things that we don't perceive to have heartbeats, like plants that are living and breathing, and trees, the oxygen that we get from trees and the carbon dioxide that we reciprocate back to the planet that they take in. Yeah. Every living thing is special. Yeah. And has a place in furthering our evolution as a species to survive. I mean, and I think that helps with this ego death, and helps with this maybe, hey, relax, like take a deep breath. Just take a deep breath, just stop rushing to get to the next thing. And you said you're 34, I'm 33, Zach's 31. Oh my God.
Come on, dude.
Sorry. And that, I think this is the age that I don't want to speak for every generation before us, but it seems about right that we're starting to figure out how to slow down, and like, how much do I wish I could have slowed down in my 20s? But what I did in my 20s it felt like it was supposed to be rushed so that I could learn how to slow down, so that I didn't spend the next 40 years of my life sort of like rushing and, I had to learn some things maybe the harder ways than other people might. Right. And like, but to get to that place of like slowing down and being at peace without feeling so much purpose coming from that Christian mentality is one, we were brainwashed. We were forced to, and we were told by really powerful people that we loved, like our parents and the pastors, that we were the answer. And when you realize that it's not that you're not the answer, it's that everything is the answer.
Yes.
Is such a powerful effect on taking a deep breath and just taking a moment and being like, you can break down everything we use that's been built in some third world country, however long ago, that's going to disintegrate over thousands of more years, and every little thing has a something, and it's all part of, this rather overwhelming endless amounts of systems and potential and possibilities. And it's interesting how to find more peace. And I think I like how you said practice. It feels like so much like a practice. And I think one thing that I'm getting a little bit better at, like an inchworm, is learning how to have less shame when I do fail my self-help ways, or I work out like crazy all the time and I love eating healthy and I do these retreats that help me get closer to the source of my true body. And if I like fall off that line a little bit or that mark, I feel like I'm a sinner.
Shame.
Right.
And I'm like, wait a minute, so go harder the next day.
Yeah.
And I'm learning,
Eating disorders.
Yeah,
exactly.
So it's like, oh man, I have everything you need with that. All right. So this is so simple, but it is the best bit of advice I ever received, because I would go through that same thing and fall off of my routines and beat myself up. Not only would I beat myself up, I would punish myself by going harder at the gym and restricting more food. The thing is, your body, your metabolism is a set of checks and balances. Roughly, give or take, by noon every day, you're going to have burned an average amount of calories. The thing is, if you have not taken in enough, eventually you're going to really, really, really need calories. And so, like, for example, if you have somebody that doesn't eat until 2 p.m., they tend to overeat big time in the evening because there's this huge calorie deficit. And then it might turn into a binge session or like an overeat session, and maybe they feel shame about it. So what do? They get up the next day, they work 2 hours instead of 1, and they restrict even more, and it turns into this shitty cycle. So here's what's beautiful. Your body is nature. You can't fight nature. If a tornado is going to come, guess what? You ain't stopping it. So the thing is, you might as well meet your body with what it's trying to tell you. So that means if you messed up one day, guess what? You wipe the slate clean and you eat normally and just pick right back up. And the thing is, if you find yourself in that cycle, you could be overtraining, you could be under eating, and that's why it's causing that. But it requires a lot of forgiveness and just simply not trying to make up for it, but just start back with your routine when you can. And and like, you kind of got to laugh it off and be like, it's not that big of a deal. Like, what's going to happen?
Yeah.
Right.
Because the thing is, when it comes to regression and body composition, like, you're not going to lose progress from one meal. Just like you didn't gain body fat from, just one time. It takes years, right? And the same thing, like, you're not going to lose it from eating one salad. Like, it's a progression of time and like what you've been up to. So it's funny because I feel like it's a very interesting lesson in self-forgiveness and like showing us that we cannot strong arm our physicality into fitting into a mold, like, you can't cut corners. It's nature.
Accept and surrender. Accept and surrender. Just accept yourself, right?
Yeah. And it's okay to it's okay to want to transform, like, that's a big thing that I talk about is you have to be able to accept yourself and love yourself, or aim to practice it just as you are, even and especially if you want to transform physically.
Totally.
You cannot have one without the other.
Yeah. It really is a dance. It's not just one way. We're such complicated beings. It's not black and white. It's every freaking color imaginable, plus all the colors we can't perceive as humans. There's so much more out in the world we don't even understand most of the time.
Yeah.
It's not just one way. And I think realizing it's not just one way is the way.
Yeah.
Right?
That's it.
Letting go. Accept and surrender. It's hard. Everything you just said about the body, and we've talked a lot about sexual shame and the purity culture and being raised in that. You're absolutely right. It takes a long time for the body to actually physically and visually change. But I swear to God, it changes for me every day when I look in that mirror as somebody that suffers from body dysmorphia. And so if you're listening and you do feel like your body changes so quickly with the decisions you make, for you, it might. And I'm here to say that I suffer from that too. And it's getting a little bit better and better. But I do see things that I think only I get to see that nobody else will ever see. And that is also part of this process of learning how to accept just who I am. Right.
Yeah.
We've been going for an hour and a half. Damn. Not bad. This has been amazing. Zach, do you have any sort of like really pertinent questions that you would like to ask?
Pertinent. I like your words.
Kim's been using more, smart words. I want to try to use a smart word.
Yeah, go for it, guys.
So what schooling have you done? Because something that we both have mentioned, we just interviewed someone here in town that was part of the Adventist church, the Seventh-day Adventist church, and they incorporate education deeply. So they, from a very young age, they're told to get a higher education, doctor or anything, and take that further to make the SDA like name further. Whereas same way we were raised, kind of like you, it was like, don't go to school, you'll stop believing in God.
Yeah, don't go to college.
But it sounds like you've done you've had some education, correct?
Say that last part again. Your mic cut out just a little bit.
Oh, sorry. What education have you had? It sounds like you've gone to college or something.
Yeah. So I went to community college, like I said, and I got my certification for skincare. So I was an esthetician for 10 years, would do facials, chemical peels, body waxing, all that fun stuff. And then I went back and got a certification for nutrition. So I am precision nutrition certified and also Reiki Master certified. So that's been the extent. I mean, I'm self-taught in terms of my business and all of it. So, I mean, there's all sorts of continuing education and amazing resources in general on the internet. And then if you're intuitively just business minded and you're good at figuring stuff out, it's really not that bad. Like,
totally.
I have a friend that's getting his MBA in business right now, and I'm teaching him stuff as he's going through it, and we're kind of like conversing, and he's like, yeah, they're behind.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
Especially with social media. It is a totally different ballgame, and it's changing very quickly. He was like, whoa, just from you like taking extra courses here and there, he was like, you definitely know more than what, as far as I know, with what he knows now in what they're teaching. And he's like, this is very interesting and making me question my decisions,
Totally. And I think with what you're doing, I mean, like, there's a difference between like getting like a chemistry degree or, like if you want to be a doctor where you're required to like, you want to be a surgeon, you have 12 years of academic schooling. But same thing with like us and our business here in our podcast, even doing music for like 8 years with no business degrees, or while I was in nursing school, the best thing that works is just doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just do it. Just jump in, make mistakes, get awkward, be nervous, experience what it's like to be a fool doing something like, putting yourself out there. And normally from those mistakes or those issues, you learn right there, oh, if I do this, right? And so like schooling's, I think for business, I've heard this so much, that people that go and get business degrees, which I have nothing against, I've always considered maybe going back for a more specific degree. But it's a changing world and it's happening really fast. And I think like there's so much opportunity to get out there and try new things and learn in that process. Similar to like, I don't know, leaving a religion. You just gotta, part of it is just like stepping out and then experiencing that fear and learning all of, the communities and everything, the resources.
Yeah.
Why don't you, I feel like we're getting somewhat of a free session right now, just hearing a lot of what you've been saying. And so, I don't know, I feel like this is a good opportunity to wrap things up.
Yeah. How about, because something I want to start asking all the guests we have is to all the kids stuck in a very evangelical family right now, to all the adults stuck in the evangelical faith, can't get their minds off the religion that they're stuck into, that we all are so familiar with being stuck in it. What would be some advice if they happen to stumble across this podcast that you're on? What would be some advice you could give them to encourage them?
Wow, that's a tough question because I think everybody is so different in what they need. I guess what I would suggest would be, without getting attached to the answer, if you are not afraid to ask, what would the questions that you would ask? Be it of creation, of the world, of the afterlife, and not having an attachment to needing an answer, but like just starting to ponder, and trusting that there are people out there on the other side of this that have gotten over that initial feeling of the floor crumbling from underneath you, like there's no answer. And so I'm just going to disappear into the abyss. Now that I don't know for sure, know that I know that this is an actual fact, everything that I've been taught. So don't be afraid to ask questions. And if you weren't afraid, what would you ask?
If you weren't afraid, what questions would you ask? I think that's big because as a kid growing up in it, that's what it was. I'm too afraid to even think of the questions I would ask because I don't want to sin and I don't want to do the wrong thing. If you weren't afraid, what would you ask? That's a good, I like that a lot.
Yeah. It's like curiosity potentially is the fertilizer to evolution. Curious minds get really far. Keep asking questions. It goes with our leaders, goes with the systems that are in place now all over the world, everything that's happening, all the information that's so beautifully orchestrated to only see what we should be saying or what they, however it goes, we should be questioning everything.
Yeah. Question everything. Even like a big thing that I see is people will turn around and start to fall into another religion of some sort. We put our full faith into something else. It's like
familiarity.
Yeah. It's like, keep asking questions, question everything. Like I want you guys that listen to me today, question everything that I have said,
Totally.
And I mean, I tell my clients that too, because even in working with a therapist or a coach or some sort of mentor, if they are putting you in a place where you're not allowed to question the things that they're presenting to you, guess what? You're just being thrown into another construct.
Absolutely.
Dropping bombs.
Absolutely.
Love
that. Yeah. Damn, that's a great. Let's end it there. I'm gonna. Why don't you go ahead? Tell us is your website. I know that we have found your contact, but why don't you go ahead and use this as an opportunity to share your business and how we can find your podcast? Go for it.
Yeah, so I am at Never Settle Life on Instagram and TikTok. My link on Instagram is the best place to find me, which has like all my links there. And then I also have a podcast, which is the Never Settle Life podcast. And this isn't, spoiler alert, I have never talked about this ever. So you're not going to go into my content and find anything about religion, really. If you would like to talk to me, I'm an open book. Please send me a message. Like, I'm not shy. So I'm here if anybody needs some help.
Love it. Speaking on that, and just off the record, you can cut this out if you want. We do share, you've probably seen on our page, we share as much content as we possibly can because we're consistently shadow banned for the content we talk about. Do you want us to not tag you in the posts that we post?
You can totally tag me. I mean, like at some point, I know that I'm going to have to talk about this. So feel free. Like, okay. I'm debating on sharing it on my stories. I have my parents don't check Instagram, and my sister-in-law keeps a very close eye on me. So I have her blocked from stories as of like this morning. And I'm like, I'll know what to do as soon as it.
Well, you know how we run our content. We create, I don't know, upwards of 15 clips that are long forms of the entire cast. And we'll do sometimes 20 to 25 shorts of the entire cast. And so I just want to say thank you again for reaching out to us on your own. When we got the message, and Zach originally was communicating with you, and he had said, hey, someone had reached out asking to be on. If you could imagine, we've had some really weird people reach out to want to be on our cast in really obscure ways. And so you were kind of the first experience of just someone in our country who's just really was touched by what we're doing and felt called to do this. And so I just want to reiterate to you that like we are in no place to put you in a position to like make your life harder by you being this vulnerable to go public. But I want to thank you because one thing that Zach and I hope this happens for you too, one thing that Zach and I feel really lucky is we're not creating content anymore that's about views and, capitalism. And so it's frustrating for us, but our relationship has blossomed in ways we couldn't imagine. And I'm actually healing exponentially by talking
about it
publicly and posting it. And you could imagine our families have gone up in, earthquakes. Everything's different. This podcast has really fucked shit up in our community. But that's why we're doing it, is because we were pastors' kids and we're raised we're reflecting what our father is doing actively in our own community.
Yeah.
And so we've benefited a lot. And I'm going to use this. What I like to do today is I'm going to get a good workout in now because I waited. And I'm going to really try my best to take everything that you shared as a woman and your experiences and everything you've vulnerably shared, and let that just like soil, I'm going to plant those seeds. And I have no doubt so much is going to grow from this. And so thank you so much. And I really hope that whoever you meet that might be suffering from, maybe they don't suffer, maybe they have a story, send them our way. We'd love to talk with them.
Absolutely, I will.
And if you ever would like to have us on, Zach and I work out, eat well, all the things that we're doing, we're all about on
health,
board with,
fitness,
and we would love to come on your show if and when you felt more comfortable about that.
Yeah. Hell yeah. I know. On that note, if you don't mind me asking really quickly, any advice on coming out? It's so funny because I know I've mentioned to you guys, I'm a psychic medium, I'm an intuitive. Shit's kind of weird from my perspective as far as the afterlife and whatnot. And I'm very vocal about it on my business page. And it's just funny because the only interaction I've had in general, obviously I'm not really in church, is I've had my brother reach out and be like, do you know who you're talking to? When you're channeling somebody, is it a demon? And that's been the extent of it. Everybody's kind of left me alone. I don't know what to expect, you guys. They will not, if I were to just outright, if they heard this all verbatim, it would kill them, you know?
Yeah.
Well, I think that my advice would be, what you experienced when you left that marriage and all that shame, never how everyone abandoned you. I think that's just a really good example of how deep this culture goes. So when you go public about any of this, we always say shadow banned. I think that's a victimized approach, but we do know that shadow banning is happening. But what we see more of is this entire huge, very loud, toxic male, masculine, Christian energy that's in social medias that have a really big impact on comments. Because if one thing we've learned, a very small percentage of people like videos, a very small percentage of people comment, and then and those small percentages tend to be the outliers of extremists, whatever side they fall on.
Right.
And that side, the people that abandon us, that are angry, that are shaming us, are very loud. And I think that that's an encouragement for us. It's almost like this reflection of what it felt like when we were leaving the church. It was kind of like, I know I'm doing something right because they hate me so much. That's what they taught me. If you do go more public about it, just know now you're not alone, right? I think what's incredible is the churches have this crazy community if they all talk and they have these crazy networks. And me and Zach desire more creators, content creators, because there's so many out there that are doing this that we haven't been able to touch with or be able to connect with. And I think for us, a lot of that, same idea as us meeting our significant others. The moment you don't feel alone at all,
empowering.
That's the littlest to know that whatever happens, you can find support or whatever, and just know that. I don't know, but this is one of those things that I think we've learned that everything that we expected, how difficult it would be, it's been
pretty difficult.
Very difficult. And you have a business, with a product, and this is a hard content to have a successful business come from it, right? And because I think but we really do believe that there's a lot of people in our entire world that all share. It's part of our evolution to be talking about these things. I think that it's very possible religion became filled into our evolution as a survival thing, because we all focus, as you're saying, safety, your parents, right? Abuse they came from. It's evolution. they come together to be like safe and not have that anymore. And now we're finding that maybe it's hindering our evolutionary process. So we should be talking about that. What worked in the past in certain ways just ain't working anymore for a lot of us. And I think there's a lot of people who would agree 99% don't feel comfortable doing this.
Yeah.
So
it's that primal feeling of I'm going to be ostracized from the tribe, and that means death. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Totally.
But we know that it's just not true. It's just not. That's not the truth.
Yeah.
I was venting to my husband about it like last night, and he is laying on his stomach in the bed, and he's like, I love you. My family loves you. We're here no matter what. You're going to be great. And he's like, you got this. Say whatever the fuck you want to say. And he just rolls over, and I'm like, damn Catholics.
Seriously. You guys have that box. We didn't ever have the box.
Yeah, the safety.
Got to drink and everything.
We always had to look at those like 45-year-old men in the eyes and be like, it was me the whole time.
Yeah, it is tough. It is tough. There's just, I think there's a lot of possibility for backlash. But you've already experienced that. And just from your story, it can't get worse than it did at 26.
That's true.
You have your husband in a loving family. So the worst thing that could happen is that it's the same like ostracization that you already experienced, but now you have unconditional love in your life that you didn't have before. But there is something about being truthful and your true self. And then if the ones that you believe love you, like your family, pull that love from you, it's almost like, oh, so you don't love my true self. And that's what I've experienced is like my true self. I'd like deserves true love. And if you're not going to be that, then that's their choice, not yours. And you're just being true.
Yeah.
And I think my final thing I'll say to that, which is something I'm learning right now with our parents.
Yeah.
I just had a conversation with them that we try really hard to keep things private on this cast from, their pastors, and we love them, and we believe they love us. But what we're doing is really affecting their lives. It's scaring the shit out of them. They are in pain because of us healing. And they've vocalized it a little bit to us now. And so there's something that I'm learning in this that I've never wanted, which was I never wanted my parents to feel what they made me feel, which was what we're doing right now and rising up just to have a conversation about our upbringing inevitably makes them feel shame and guilt, I believe, and fear of being ostracized from this, whatever that means. And they're starting to vocalize that this isn't fair. We're feeling ostracized. We're feeling pushed out from our family. We're feeling embarrassed. And I've had to look at them and be like, I've never wanted that, but this is how I have felt since I was a kid.
Yeah.
And I'm just trying to figure it out now. And I'm sorry, but that's not what I'm trying to do.
Yeah.
And I think that what I'm learning is that hurts me really bad. I don't like seeing my mom cry in front of me, even though she's cried most of her life with everything I've done. This is different because I'm not angry anymore. And I am starting to heal. And I almost see myself as a child in them a little bit.
Yeah, true.
Because we're all just people and they had to figure it out their way. And so I'm learning how to have a better, broader perspective on accepting my parents. And this has helped me, but it's hurting them based on what they believe. Their culture and their cult and what they live by, this is going to hurt them if they keep, and that's on them. And I can't do anything about that, but I can at least learn how to be aware of them as people, as just being humans. And that will hopefully help strengthen the relationship in this process, right? In a violent healing way that I couldn't have ever imagined. And that's what I think me and Zach are in totally different ways, because he has a very different relationship with our parents. That's something I am learning. We no longer are being tricked by the devil and in the world. We've kind of become demons, and we are running the devil's work by doing this.
In their eyes.
In their eyes. And to me, I don't know, that feels more powerful than being led by demons. So, I mean, it's I don't know, so.
True. Yeah.
That's been my experience lately.
Oh, that's so good. Yeah, Zach, I feel like I relate a lot to your perspective, I remember specifically you being like, yeah, every time I would get in the shower, I would just cry. And I'm like,
Wow.
that was me.
Yeah.
Just no, it's so wild.
I have so much gratitude for you actually just listening to our podcast and even being healed by it, or just even receiving anything from it, because that's like my truth of just like the sadness and true pain we were raised in, and just believing that. And it was like, well, I just cried every time I was in the shower because at the time I didn't know, but looking back at it now, it was like I was just suffering. I just had no idea. But it's just so true. It's so real. That's why this is so important. That's why this has so much meaning, just talking about it.
Yeah. Keep going, you guys. Like, how long have you been at this now?
Oh God,
year and 2 months, somewhere around there.
2 months,
yeah.
3 months.
Sometimes it takes a long time, and all of a sudden something just pops off. Like I was, I think, about 2 years into my business, and I had like one post go viral on my NSL page, and all of a sudden I had like overnight 12,000 new followers. I was like,
wow.
You never know. You never know. So, thank you guys so much. This has been
thank you, Kim.
Awesome. Keep going.
We will.
Yeah.
One of the things that we, as we're learning how to get, me and Zach, we do everything. We edit, we film, we produce, we direct this, we post it, we're social media. So it's a lot to find more guests. One of the things that we have different segments, and one of those segments is like where we find Reddit posts throughout all of the different religious forms that are ex-Christian, ex-Catholic, ex-Presbyterian. And we find like juicy posts that are kind of more like modern pop culture, as the idea of like using pop culture or like using things in the moment, and that people anonymously share some of the craziest shit. And then we'll read them on the cast and then just talk about that person's post. And we would love to have you back on for a segment where instead of you doing this, we just have your take and your input on breaking down these things.
I'm so down. That sounds so much fun.
Cool. Very fun.
So, we'll hit you up whenever that happens in the future. But mad thanks. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Kim, for doing this. And we
are eternally grateful that you were willing to come on and share your story.
Yeah. Absolutely. Too, business-wise, if you guys need any advice with like how to streamline this shit, because it is a lot of work, I understand. Please don't hesitate to reach out. If you're like, hey, do you have a process for this or whatever? Let me know.
Totally. We will.
Totally.
For sure.
Well, happy Sunday. I hope you have a great, and then tomorrow's a day off, so enjoy your day off, right?
If you get one.
I don't know. If
she has her own business. She doesn't think,
What's happening tomorrow? I don't even know.
Martin Luther King Jr.
Oh,
Day.
shit. No, I didn't mark my schedule off. Whoops.
Well, I hope it's a good rest of your evening, and we want to say thank you to your husband for loving you and showing you that. We are eternally grateful for him as well. As we are for our partners who are
everything.
A huge support in the decisions we've made. And so thanks again. Much love. Good luck.
Thank you guys. You too. Absolutely. Reach out if you need anything. Thank you so much for having me on.
Of course. Thanks for being here.
All right, Kim.
Thank you.
Bye.
Well, thanks everybody for listening. That was incredible.
That was amazing.
Thank you, Kim. And we are excited to have more guests coming soon. Zachary?
Yes.
I love you.
Love you.
I feel juiced up right now. That was really awesome. I think there's a lot of healing in talking about this shit.
Yeah. That was such an interesting comparison than talking to Jonathan. I felt like when we were talking to Jonathan, I was learning so much about the SDA culture.
It's just different.
It's just super different. And then the second she started talking about like youth group and women's group, men's group, this thing, church on this day, I'm like, similar. I feel like you're talking about my upbringing. It was I connected so much with everything she was saying.
I think though that there are a lot of similarities though, between all of us that are, I think purity culture has a big fucking impact.
Totally.
Obviously. But this is almost up to 2 hours. So thank you, everybody. We will see you soon.
We'll see you soon, everyone. Thanks for being here. Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Bye.